When you really think about power, about the energy that runs our entire modern civilization, there's this fundamental assumption we all make without even realizing it.
Right, the assumption of a physical connection.
Exactly. We just assume everything has to be physically connected. I mean, think about your daily routine right now. You plug your phone into a physical cable, right?
Yeah, and that cable goes straight into a physical socket in the wall.
And behind that drywall is a physical network of copper wires. They stretch out to transformers, travel along these massive wooden poles, or they're buried in concrete trenches, and it all goes all the way back to a power plant miles away.
It's entirely linear.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's linear. If you want the energy, you have to be physically tethered to the source.
You're basically living inside a global spiderweb of infrastructure. I mean, if there's a break in the wire, like a tree falls or a transformer blow, the flow just stops instantly. You're either connected to the web or you're in the dark.
Right. It's completely binary. It's highly tangible. You can see it. You can touch it, though, obviously. You shouldn't touch a live wire. And you know exactly how it gets to you.
But today, we are stepping into the mind of a man who looked at that entire physical web and thought it was completely unnecessary.
Completely primitive, almost. We are looking at an intellectual landscape that is completely untethered from the rules of infrastructure that the rest of us just take for granted.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild one.
It really is. We're pulling from a fascinating stack of source material today, specifically excerpts and analyses from The Extraordinary Inventions and Lost Theories of Nikola Tesla. We want to get past the urban legends to get to the actual physics of what he believed, what he genuinely built, and what he was on the brink of inventing before his work was abruptly halted.
It's an incredible set of documents to unpack, mostly because we live in a world built on his foundational work. I mean, the alternating current system, the literal electrical standard that powers the room you are sitting in right now, is his legacy.
Right, he won the war of currents.
He absolutely did. But today, we aren't looking at that accepted foundation. We are looking out at the frontier. The projects and theories in these documents, they still sound like absolute science fiction more than a century later.
They really do.
We're looking at a man who wasn't just trying to invent better gadgets. He was trying to rewrite the fundamental relationship between humanity and the physical universe.
And to understand that relationship, we kind of have to start with the project that most clearly defines his core belief about physics.
The wireless energy transmission?
Exactly. Tesla genuinely believed the Earth itself could conduct electrical energy. He wasn't looking at the Earth as just a giant rock floating through a vacuum.
No, his paradigm was entirely different. At the time, and frankly, this is still the dominant paradigm today, our understanding of electricity relied on isolation.
Meaning keeping it contained.
Right. You force electrons through a conductive material like a copper wire, and you wrap that copper in rubber or plastic to keep the electricity from escaping into the environment.
You want to trap the energy.
Exactly. Keep it inside the pipe, so to speak. But Tesla looked at the environment itself, the dirt, the bedrock, the ambient atmosphere, and asked, why are we fighting the environment? The environment is the conductor.
Wow.
Yeah, he saw the planet as a deeply connected system of waves and frequencies, a medium, not an obstacle.
So imagine the Earth not as a rock, but as a giant spherical extension cord. Instead of plugging a lamp into a wall socket that leads to a power plant, you're essentially plugging it directly into the atmosphere or directly into the ground and drawing power from the ambient environment.
It's close, but an extension cord still implies a single linear path from point A to point B.
Oh, true, like a direct line.
Right. Tesla was thinking more like a giant pool of water. If you drop a massive stone into the center of a perfectly still pond, the ripples spread out in concentric circles and hit every single edge of the pond simultaneously.
Oh, I see.
You don't need a wire connecting the stone to the edge of the water. The medium itself, the water, transmits the kinetic energy. Tesla believed you could do the exact same thing with electricity using the Earth and the atmosphere.
So he thought you could generate an electrical wave, pump it into the Earth, and the entire planet would just like ring with that energy.
Yes. Anyone, anywhere,
Okay.
with the right receiver could just tune in and tap into that rippling wave of power.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources detail his work on the Wardenclyffe Tower, which was this massive, ominous-looking structure in New York, explicitly designed to transmit power through the ground and the sky.
Funded by J.P. Morgan initially.
Right. And his claims in the text are just staggering. He wasn't just saying he could send a tiny telegraph signal. He claimed he could send industrial levels of electricity wirelessly across continents. He claimed he could power factories, run ships at sea, and light up entire cities without a single wire connecting them.
The sheer scale of the ambition is what makes it so fascinating. He was proposing an infrastructuralist society. Think about the geopolitics of that for a second.
A world where energy is as ambient and accessible as the air we breathe.
Exactly. It completely removes the need for centralized control. It removes the vulnerability to weather or physical sabotage. But to do it, he had to rely on a very specific aspect of the atmosphere. He theorized that the upper atmosphere was highly conductive.
Wait, the atmosphere is conductive because if I hold a live wire in my backyard, the electricity doesn't just jump through the air to my face, unless it's some massive voltage sparking, right? Air is generally an insulator, isn't it?
The lower atmosphere, the troposphere where we live and breathe, is an excellent insulator. You are completely right about that. But Tesla theorized, and modern science later proves him absolutely correct on this, that the upper layers of the atmosphere are totally different.
The ionosphere.
Yes, the ionosphere. Solar radiation, specifically ultraviolet light and X-rays from the sun, hits the thin gases up there and literally knocks electrons off the atoms.
Oh, wow. So it creates a charge.
It creates a massive global shell of highly charged particles, ions, and free electrons surrounding the planet.
So you have a highly conductive shell high above the Earth and the highly conductive actual dirt and salt water of the Earth below.
Exactly. And the insulating air in between where we live, in physics terms, that forms a giant spherical capacitor.
Two conductive plates separated by an insulator?
Precisely. Tesla realized that if you could pump enough electrical energy into the system at the exact right frequency, you could create standing electrical waves that would bounce between the Earth and the ionosphere, traveling around the globe without losing their strength.
And the craziest part of the source material isn't just the theory. It says right here that he actually proved the concept, at least on a smaller scale, before Wardenclyffe was even built.
The Colorado Springs experiments.
Yeah, he went out to Colorado Springs in 1899, built this wooden laboratory out on the prairie, and demonstrated wireless lighting.
Yes, those experiments are the crucial proof of concept. He built a massive magnifying transmitter out there. He had a 130-foot wooden mast with a copper ball on top, pushing millions of volts of high-frequency alternating current into the Earth and the surrounding air.
Just pumping it straight into the environment.
And it worked. He was able to light up a bank of incandescent bulbs positioned in a field miles away from the laboratory.
Miles away.
Miles away. There were absolutely no wires connecting the laboratory to the bulbs. They were simply grounded into the dirt, and they received the electrical energy transmitted through the ambient field.
So he literally turned the immediate environment of Colorado Springs into that ringing bell you described earlier. The power is just pulsing through the dirt.
Yep.
But the text notes that while Colorado Springs was a success, the full-scale global system, the Wardenclyffe Tower in New York, was never actually completed. He lost his funding from J.P. Morgan, the project was abandoned, and to this day, the physics behind global wireless power transmission remains highly debated.
Highly debated, yes.
But why is it still debated? I mean, if it worked in a dirt field in Colorado, why wouldn't it work across the Atlantic Ocean?
Well, because scaling up in physics rarely means just building a bigger version of the exact same machine. The Earth is massive. It's incredibly heterogeneous and highly complex.
Right, it's not a uniform copper wire.
Not at all. When you talk about pumping energy into the Earth's crust or the ionosphere to power a distant city, you have to deal with the inverse square law and, massive dissipation.
Meaning the further the wave travels, the weaker it gets.
Precisely. In Colorado, he was transmitting over a relatively short distance, pumping an enormous amount of power into a localized area just to light a few small bulbs. It was actually incredibly inefficient.
Oh, so a lot of power was wasted.
Most of the energy he pumped into the ground was lost as heat or just scattered. If you try to scale that up to power London from New York, the amount of energy you would have to pump into the Wardenclyffe Tower would be astronomical.
Just to get a fraction of it to the other side.
Right. The debate today centers on that exact efficiency. Modern physicists generally agree that while you can transmit power wirelessly, we do it today with wireless phone chargers, over a distance of a few millimeters, doing it globally through the Earth's natural cavities would result in massive energy loss.
So you might be able to send the power, but 99% of it might dissipate before it reaches the receiver.
It's the difference between tossing a pebble into a small puddle and trying to make a wave big enough to cross the Pacific Ocean. The wave might technically exist, but it's going to be unnoticeable by the time it hits the other side, unless you drop a literal meteor into the water.
That is a great way to visualize it. The physics of global transmission accounting for the Earth's curvature, the varying geological resistance of rock versus ocean, the constant shifting of the ionosphere due to solar weather, it presents a monumental engineering hurdle.
It really does. But even acknowledging those massive hurdles, the source material rightly points out the sheer audacity of the vision.
It really makes you pause and look around at your own life right now. I mean, just picture your street. Imagine what it would look like without a single power line cluttering the sky.
Beautiful, honestly.
Right. And imagine the economic shift. If a remote developing village had the exact same access to ambient atmospheric power as a massive metropolis like Tokyo or New York, no need to dig up the environment to lay thousands of miles of copper.
It's energy equity. It would completely restructure global economics. Countries wouldn't be able to easily embargo energy if it was a shared atmospheric resource, much like radio waves are today.
But that brings up a really interesting causal question. If he is pumping millions of volts of electrical energy into the ground, trying to ring the Earth like a bell, what happens to the physical Earth itself?
That's a very good question.
Does the rock and the dirt just safely absorb that vibration?
And that exact train of thought is what led Tesla to his next major area of investigation.
Because everything is connected for him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you can manipulate electrical waves on a massive scale, it naturally follows that you start looking at mechanical waves. Energy isn't just electrons moving, it's also physical movement. It's physical vibration.
Which leads us to what the press famously dubbed the earthquake machine.
Oh, this is a great story.
The source material details a small mechanical oscillator that Tesla built in his New York laboratory. Now, we aren't talking about a massive tower here. The text describes it as a pocket-sized pneumatic device.
Right, something you could hold in your hand.
And he claimed that if this tiny little box was tuned correctly, it could resonate with physical structures to the point of causing actual earthquakes.
It is a phenomenal example of how cohesive Tesla's worldview was. He didn't compartmentalize electricity and mechanical engineering. To him, an electrical wave and a physical vibration were two sides of the same coin.
It all comes down to frequency.
It all comes down to the fundamental physics of frequency.
The sources share this legendary story about the oscillator. He reportedly attached this little vibrating box to a steel pillar in his Manhattan laboratory. As it began to vibrate, he kept tuning the frequency.
Looking for that sweet spot.
Yeah. And eventually, the vibrations traveled down the pillar into the foundation, and nearby buildings started to shake so violently that plaster was falling off the walls, windows were shattering, and the police were called to stop what they thought was a localized earthquake.
That's quite the visual.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here. Did a pocket-sized vibrating box really almost split Manhattan in half, or is this just a fantastic myth?
It's crucial that we separate the showmanship from the science here. Did he almost split Manhattan in half? No. The source text explicitly clarifies that the apocalyptic claims were heavily exaggerated.
As things usually were with him in the press.
Right. But the core phenomenon that a small device caused the surrounding buildings to tremble enough to cause a panic, that is entirely plausible. And the physics underlying his claim are absolutely sound.
Okay, explain the mechanism to me. How does a small box shaking back and forth cause a multi-story building down the street to start crumbling? It violates common sense.
It does seem counterintuitive.
It feels like you would need a wrecking ball to do that kind of damage, not a pocket watch.
It feels that way because we are used to thinking about force in terms of brute impact, like a wrecking ball. But Tesla wasn't using brute force. He was utilizing a phenomenon called mechanical resonance.
The resonance. Okay.
Every single physical object in the universe, a steel beam, a glass pane, a suspension bridge, a skyscraper, has a natural frequency. This is a specific rate at which the object naturally wants to vibrate based on its mass, its stiffness, and its geometry.
Give me a visual for that.
Think of a child swinging on a playground swing. That swing has a natural frequency. It takes a specific amount of time to swing forward and backward.
Right, it has its own rhythm.
Exactly. If you walk up to that child and push them at random, chaotic intervals, you are going to fight their momentum. You might push them forward just as they are swinging backward. The energy cancels out, and they don't go very high.
Right, it's just a jerky, uncomfortable ride.
It is. But if you wait and you give the child a push at the exact right fraction of a second, perfectly matching the natural frequency of their swinging motion, something incredible happens.
You don't need to push very hard.
You don't. Even a very small, gentle push, if timed perfectly, adds its kinetic energy to the energy already in the system. Each small push compounds. The energy accumulates perfectly, and the child goes higher and higher with barely any effort from you.
So you aren't overpowering the system. You are cooperating with it to build up a massive amount of stored energy.
That is resonance. And that is exactly how Tesla's oscillator worked. It wasn't a giant hammer smashing the steel beam in his lab. It was a precise tuner.
Wow.
He attached it to the beam and slowly adjusted the rhythm of the vibrations until he found the exact natural frequency of that specific steel beam. Once he hit that sweet spot, the oscillator began feeding tiny amounts of kinetic energy into the structure over and over.
Compounding perfectly with every cycle.
Yes. The beam began to vibrate violently. That vibration transferred into the bedrock, which shared a natural frequency with the buildings next door.
So he was basically picking the lock of the building's structural integrity using math and rhythm.
Yes, he was hacking the physics of the structure. The idea that you can multiply kinetic energy through precise frequency matching is foundational physics. It's the exact same reason why a military commander will order their troops to break step when marching over a bridge.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, if hundreds of soldiers are marching in unison and their footfalls happen to match the natural resonant frequency of the bridge, those small rhythmic impacts will compound until the bridge literally tears itself apart. It has actually happened historically.
So he basically built an automated mechanical version of an army marching in unison, scaled down to fit in his pocket.
That's a perfect analogy.
That is genuinely terrifying when you think about the applications. But it also shows how deeply, almost obsessively, he understood the hidden mechanics of the physical world. He was constantly looking for the hidden rhythm in things.
Constantly.
And according to the sources, this hyperfixation on tuning into specific frequencies eventually leads him to point his instruments away from the earth entirely. I mean, if he's listening to the resonance of the dirt, it makes sense he would eventually build equipment sensitive enough to pick up frequencies he didn't generate himself.
He stops looking at the ground and he looks up at the sky.
Which brings us to one of the most poignant and often misunderstood moments in the source material, his attempts to communicate with other worlds.
This is a really beautiful part of his history.
It is. The text details an event during his time in Colorado Springs in 1899, the same place he did the wireless lighting experiments. He had built highly sensitive radio receivers to monitor the electrical storms passing over the plain.
Listening to the lightning.
Right. But while monitoring the static, he detected something else. Repeating radio signals. He wrote about it later, and the quote in the text is incredibly striking. He said, "I felt as though I were present at the birth of a new knowledge."
The birth of a new knowledge. You can hear the profound awe and isolation in his words.
He genuinely deeply believed he was receiving intelligent signals from Mars or Venus.
I really did.
And it's so easy for us, sitting here with our smartphones, our deep space telescopes, and our understanding of astrophysics, to look back at a man in the late 1800s claiming he heard Martians and just dismiss him as a crackpot.
Oh, absolutely. It's the easiest thing to do.
But put yourself in that wooden lab in 1899. You have literally invented a new way of listening to the invisible waves of the universe. You are sitting alone in the dark, surrounded by massive copper coils, listening to the random chaotic static of lightning storms.
And suddenly, the static breaks.
Exactly. You hear a clear repeating rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. If you are the only person on Earth who can hear it, how do you not assume someone out there is saying hello?
It is a profoundly human reaction. We are biologically wired as pattern-seeking creatures. When we see or hear order arising from chaos, we naturally assume a consciousness created that order.
Right, intentionality.
But what is truly important here isn't his interpretation of the signals, it's the physical fact that he received them at all. The source material notes that today, modern science assumes he was picking up natural radio emissions from space.
Things like pulsars or planetary emissions.
Exactly. The universe is incredibly loud in the radio spectrum, we just can't hear it with our biological ears. Jupiter, for example, has a massive magnetic field that interacts with its moons to emit enormous storms of radio waves.
So it's basically screaming into the void.
It really is. And pulsars, which are rapidly rotating neutron stars, they emit highly regular ticking radio signals that sweep across the Earth like a lighthouse beam. When you first hear a pulsar through a radio telescope, it sounds incredibly artificial.
The rhythm is just too perfect to be a random rock floating in space.
So perfect, in fact, that we have a modern parallel that totally vindicates Tesla's reaction.
Oh, really?
Yes. In 1967, nearly 70 years after Tesla's experiment, a brilliant astrophysicist named Jocelyn Bell Burnell discovered the first pulsar. The repeating radio signal she detected was so precise, so unnervingly rhythmic, that the team of modern 20th century astronomers at Cambridge University half-jokingly labeled the signal LGM-1.
Let me guess. Little green men.
Little green men. Because even with all their modern astronomical knowledge, their very first thought when confronted with a perfectly repeating cosmic radio pulse was, could this be an alien beacon?
That is incredible context. So Tesla wasn't actually crazy for thinking a repeating pattern meant intelligence. The world's top astronomers thought the exact same thing decades later when they encountered the same phenomenon.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This event doesn't point to madness. It actually highlights his staggering genius. He was the very first human being to build an instrument sensitive enough to detect the natural radio pulse of the cosmos.
Wow.
He wasn't wrong about hearing something out there in the dark. He heard the universe. He was simply decades early to the science of radio astronomy.
He essentially built a new sense organ for humanity. I mean, for all of human history, we could only see the stars with our eyes, interpreting the visible light spectrum. Tesla figured out how to listen to the radio spectrum. He gave us an antenna.
And because he was the very first person to possess that new sense, he had to interpret the data entirely on his own. He didn't have the benefit of a century of astrophysics to guide him.
Right, there was no textbook.
So he applied the logic of his era. If there is a signal, there must be a sender.
It really paints a picture of a man who is observing the macro universe on a level no one else even comprehends. He's listening to the stars. He's trying to hack the resonant frequencies of the Earth's crust. He's trying to turn the ionosphere into a global power grid.
He is completely outward-facing.
Right. But then the source material introduces this unbelievable pivot. He takes this entire massive understanding of signals, receivers, and frequencies, and he turns it completely inward. He applies the exact same logic to the human body.
This is where we shift from the macro to the micro, from the external cosmos to the internal cosmos of the human mind.
Our sources detail a concept Tesla worked on called the thought camera.
The thought camera.
Yes. The text states that Tesla believed human thoughts actually created physical, energetic images on the retina of the eye. And because he believed these images were physical, energetic artifacts, he claimed they could be projected and photographed. He stated, quote, "I expect to photograph thought."
It sounds like a magic trick from a Victorian seance.
It really does. It sounds like trying to take a screenshot of a dream. But let's look at the underlying logic he was using, because it's deeply tied to his views on signals.
Oh, so?
Well, we generally think of the human eye purely as a receiver. It's a biological camera lens. It takes visible light in from the outside world, focuses it on the retina, sends that signal down the optic nerve, and the brain processes it into an image.
That's the standard biological model.
But Tesla is suggesting the eye is a two-way street. He's suggesting it's not just a receiver, but a biological projector capable of beaming internal signals out.
That is a brilliant encapsulation of his theory. Let's break down why he might have thought that was physically possible.
Yeah, what's the physics there?
Well, Tesla knew the brain was fundamentally an electrical system. It operates on electrical impulses traveling across neurons. If thoughts are the result of those electrical impulses, then a thought is, by definition, an energetic event.
Okay, I follow that.
Tesla theorized that when you vividly imagine an object, that electrical storm in your brain generates a measurable frequency or a visual artifact that travels backward down the optic nerve, fundamentally altering the retina.
It's like a television screen. A TV receives a broadcast signal from a cable, but it also physically emits a glow based on what's playing. Tesla thought the eye emitted a faint, physical glow of whatever was playing on the screen of your mind.
Exactly. Now, to be absolutely clear on the history and the science, the source material confirms he never successfully built this thought camera.
Right, there are no thought photographs out there.
No. And modern biology tells us that his specific mechanical proposition that a literal, high-resolution photographic image of a thought physically manifests on the retina is just not how human anatomy works. The optic nerve does carry signals, but it doesn't project miniature photographs onto the back of your eyeball.
So the thought camera is a complete bust. It's just bad biology.
The literal machine he envisioned was a bust, yes. But the intuition behind the machine? It is breathtakingly prophetic. The source text rightly notes that this represents an incredibly early intuition about brain imaging.
How do you mean?
Think about what Tesla was fundamentally arguing. He was arguing that human cognition, the completely invisible subjective act of thinking, has a physical, measurable, energetic output. He believed thoughts weren't just ethereal magic, they were physical events that could be detected by external instruments if the instruments were sensitive enough.
When you phrase it like that is exactly what an fMRI machine or an EEG does today.
That is the exact parallel. What is an electroencephalogram? An EEG, but a machine that detects, graphs, and maps the electrical frequencies of human thought.
Wow. He was basically predicting brain scans.
Modern neuroscience uses brain-computer interfaces to scan brain waves and interpret visual stimuli. We literally have AI models today that can observe your brain's electrical activity while you look at a photograph or imagine a scene, and the computer will reconstruct a blurry digital image of what you are thinking about purely based on that electrical data.
So his fundamental physics hypothesis that thought is readable energy was 100% correct. He just thought the output terminal would be the retina, whereas modern science realizes you have to bypass the eye and look directly at the electrical activity of the cerebral cortex.
Precisely. Long before humanity possessed the computing power or the superconducting magnets required to actually map the brain's electrical storms, Tesla intuited that the mind was essentially a broadcast tower.
That is wild.
He applied his core belief that the entire universe is made of frequencies and signals to human consciousness itself. It really demonstrates how incredibly cohesive his worldview was.
He didn't have one set of physics for electrical engineering, another for structural engineering, and another for biology. To him, the Earth, the stars, the steel beam, and the human brain were all just different mediums transmitting energy. It was a single unified system.
A completely unified system.
That unified vision is so compelling and honestly quite beautiful. But as we move into the final chapters of his life detailed in the sources, we see this vision take a darker, more desperate turn.
Things get much more intense.
He has mastered in his own mind at least atmospheric electricity, mechanical resonance, and the theoretical projection of internal thoughts. So where do you go from there? He turns his attention to solving what he viewed as the ultimate physical and societal limitations holding humanity back.
The limitation of gravity and the tragedy of human war.
And this is where the historical record gets incredibly murky. We are entering the most heavily debated, speculative, and heavily classified aspects of Tesla's life.
Proceed with caution, basically.
Exactly. We are talking about reimagining human limits. Let's start with his designs for a flying machine. The source material describes blueprints for an aircraft that completely defies conventional aeronautics.
No wings.
Right, no wings, it used no combustible fuel, and it had no propellers. Tesla claimed it would use electrostatic propulsion to move through the air without resistance.
So we are completely abandoning aerodynamics as the Wright brothers understood it.
Completely. Aerodynamics is about physically interacting with the air. You generate lift by pushing air over a curved wing, creating high and low pressure zones. You generate forward momentum by using a combustion engine to violently spin a propeller that physically bites into the air and pushes it backward.
It's very mechanical.
Tesla thought all of that was primitive. The text notes that while no physical prototype of this flying machine was ever found, the theoretical physics he described deeply resemble modern concepts of ion propulsion and field-based lift.
And that is a vital detail, because it shows the trajectory of his mind. Tesla was moving entirely away from the messy, physical realities of combustion and mechanical friction.
He just wanted to bypass it all.
He viewed explosions, which is literally what an internal combustion engine is, thousands of controlled explosions per minute, as a brutally primitive way to generate movement. He was aiming to bypass physical pushing and pulling and instead manipulate fundamental fields of force.
If we look back at the earlier sections, he didn't want physical wires for power. Now, he doesn't want physical wings or spinning metal parts for flight. He wants pure field manipulation. But how does electrostatic or ion propulsion actually generate lift without moving parts?
Well, it relies on Newton's third law of motion.
Yeah.
Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, but instead of pushing air, you're pushing individual atoms.
And at the atomic level.
Yes. In modern ion propulsion, which we actively use today in deep space satellites like the Dawn spacecraft, you take a gas, usually xenon, and you bombard it with electrons to ionize it, giving the atoms a positive electrical charge.
Like what happens in the ionosphere.
Exactly the same principle. You then use a strong electromagnetic field to accelerate those positively charged ions out the back of the engine at incredibly high speeds.
So instead of a massive propeller pushing a huge volume of air slowly, you are using a magnetic field to shoot microscopic particles out the back at thousands of miles per hour.
Exactly. It creates thrust with absolutely zero moving parts. It is silent, and it requires no combustion.
But could that lift a whole ship?
Now, to be scientifically accurate, the thrust generated by modern ion engines is incredibly low. No. We're talking about the equivalent force of a piece of paper resting on your hand.
Oh, so not lifting anything heavy on Earth.
Right. It works brilliantly in the frictionless vacuum of space over long periods, but we do not currently possess the material science or the energy density required to build an ion thruster powerful enough to lift a human craft against Earth's gravity in the atmosphere.
But the foundational principle is entirely scientifically sound.
It is. Tesla was, once again, theorizing decades, maybe centuries, ahead of the material science required to actually build the machine.
But the frictionless flying machine wasn't his only attempt to rewrite human limitations in his later years. We have to discuss the teleforce, what the press universally dubbed the death ray.
A profoundly controversial topic, and one that requires strict historical objectivity to unpack.
Definitely. The source material confirms that the teleforce was a real project he worked on, though the exact technical schematics remain unknown. Tesla claimed to have invented a directed energy weapon, a concentrated beam of microscopic particles capable of melting airplane engines from hundreds of miles away.
Sounds terrifying.
It was designed to act as an impenetrable defensive shield for nations, and his ultimate stated goal for creating this terrifying weapon. He said it was a mechanical solution to make human war physically impossible.
The paradox of the teleforce is central to understanding Tesla's final decades.
I want to really dig into that paradox because I have to push back on the framing here. How does inventing a literal death ray make war impossible? It sounds completely contradictory.
It does sound like an oxymoron.
You don't create global peace by inventing a hyper-advanced way to vaporize human beings. Furthermore, the text notes he actively offered to sell this technology to multiple warring governments during the 1930s, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union. Selling a weapon of mass destruction to the highest bidder isn't exactly the behavior of a noble pacifist. It sounds like an arms dealer.
That is a highly valid critique, and it is exactly why the teleforce is so intensely debated by historians. It's a massive contradiction. On the one hand, putting a directed energy weapon on the open market in the volatile geopolitical climate of the 30s is objectively dangerous, regardless of his philosophical intentions.
Right.
But to understand his stated rationale, we have to view it through the lens of mutually assured deterrence.
Like mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons during the Cold War.
Similar in its deterrent effect, but with a crucial functional difference. Nuclear weapons are fundamentally offensive and absolute. If you launch one, you destroy everything, so the fear of retaliation keeps the peace.
Nobody wants to pull the trigger.
Right. But Tesla envisioned the teleforce primarily as a defensive mechanism. Imagine if every nation on Earth possessed an invisible, impenetrable wall of directed energy over its borders.
So a literal shield.
Yes. No bomber aircraft could cross the threshold without its engines melting. No invading army could step across the line without being repelled.
Ah, I see the logic. If offense becomes physically impossible because defense is absolute, then the act of war logically ceases to exist.
Precisely. He viewed war not as a complex sociological or political issue, but as a mechanical problem of physics.
Wow, that is such an engineer's way to look at human conflict.
It really is. If he could engineer a force field that neutralized kinetic weapons, bullets, bombs, planes, he could mechanically engineer world peace. It is a wildly utopian, perhaps deeply naive view of human nature, but it reveals his ultimate ambition. He wanted to use electromagnetic fields to insulate and protect human life from its own destructive tendencies.
But the reality is, no one bought it. No working prototype was ever found or demonstrated publicly. Which brings us to a really somber, heavy reality. We have spent this entire deep dive exploring these spectacular, mind-bending theories.
So many of them.
Global wireless ambient power, hacking the resonant frequencies of skyscrapers, communicating with cosmic intelligence, photographing the electrical output of thought, frictionless ion-propelled flying machines, and defensive shields that mechanically end war.
It's quite the resume.
If these ideas were so fundamentally grounded in real physics, even if the engineering materials of his day weren't quite ready, why didn't they change the world? Why are we still burning fossil fuels and fighting kinetic wars?
And that is the tragedy and the ultimate enduring mystery of Nikola Tesla's life.
It brings us to his abrupt end and the intense documented mystery that followed. The source material outlines the timeline of his death very clearly. Nikola Tesla died alone in his room at the New Yorker Hotel in January 1943, right in the middle of World War II.
A very tense time.
Almost immediately, the FBI and the Office of Alien Property Custodian swooped in and seized all of his documents, his trunks, his research notes, everything.
It is important to emphasize that this is not a fringe conspiracy theory. This is the verified historical record provided in our source text.
Right, this actually happened.
The United States government, actively engaged in a global war, absolutely went into his hotel room and confiscated his life's work out of fear that foreign agents might acquire his weapon designs.
The text notes that these seized papers were reviewed by an electrical engineer and government physicist named John G. Trump, who, as a historical footnote, is indeed the uncle of the 45th U.S. president.
Yep.
After the review, Trump officially concluded that the papers contained primarily speculative philosophical ideas and held no actionable military value. However, the source material explicitly highlights that some of these papers were classified and certain files were never released back to the family or the public.
Which leaves us with a profound historical dilemma.
Exactly. We are faced with two distinct possibilities. Scenario A, John G. Trump and the government physicists looked at these wildly complex theoretical notebooks, saw the fading dreams of an elderly man whose math had outpaced his grip on reality, and simply dismissed them as useless.
Right, the conventional explanation.
Or scenario B. The government physicists recognized that embedded within that theoretical math were the quiet, working blueprints for incredibly exotic, paradigm-shattering technologies. Technologies they decided were too dangerous or economically disruptive to ever release to the world.
Both scenarios are compelling, and both have profound implications for how we view the history of 20th century science. If we synthesize everything we've discussed today, we see why scenario B remains so tantalizing to so many people.
Because of his track record.
Look at his trajectory. Tesla started by proving he could transmit power wirelessly at Colorado Springs. That is a verified fact. He proved the mechanics of physical resonance. Verified. He was the first human to detect cosmic radio waves. Verified.
His track record of being completely right decades before anyone else caught up is undeniable.
Exactly. So when that exact same mind, with that exact same track record, starts talking about electrostatic propulsion or directed energy shields or the physical output of human consciousness, it becomes extremely difficult for a critical thinker to just dismiss it as the ravings of a madman.
It really does.
The missing papers fuel the legend precisely because his proven track record makes his unproven claims seem incredibly plausible.
If you had to speculate, based purely on the trajectory of the physics we've explored today, from the Wardenclyffe Tower all the way to the thought camera, what do you think he was actually working on in those final missing pages? If he had unlimited time and resources, what was he trying to build?
If we extrapolate his vision to its logical conclusion, he was moving toward a grand unification, a theory of everything applied through engineering.
Unifying everything.
He started by trying to unify energy distribution with the global wireless grid. He moved to unifying travel by removing mechanical friction and combustion. He attempted to unify the internal mind with the external world by proving thought had a physical, energetic output.
So what's the ultimate goal?
I believe his final classified investigations were likely attempting to mathematically unify human consciousness, atmospheric electrical energy, and fundamental force fields into a single manipulable framework of physics. He was trying to write the source code for a frictionless, gridless, universally connected civilization.
He was trying to build a completely unified physical reality, and the blueprints for that reality might just be sitting in a classified cardboard box in a government archive somewhere.
It remains the ultimate what-if of modern science.
And that brings us to why this deep dive deeply matters to you today. Why spend an hour unpacking the lost theories of an eccentric inventor who died in 1943? Because Tesla's life teaches us something vital about the nature of true innovation.
It really does.
Real innovation, the kind that fundamentally reshapes the human experience, requires looking past the accepted rules of physics and infrastructure. It requires looking at the copper wire powering your home and having the audacity to ask, why do we need the wire at all?
You have to be willing to rethink the foundation.
Exactly. It requires a willingness to sound completely crazy to your contemporaries.
It is a powerful reminder not to be overwhelmed by the rigid structures of the world as it's currently built. Tesla looked at a chaotic, disconnected world, and he relentlessly searched for the underlying frequencies connecting everything. From the dirt, to the stars, to the human mind. We should all be looking for the underlying frequencies in our own fields.
I couldn't agree more. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something to explore in your own mind, building purely on the verified source material we've unpacked today. We know from the text that Tesla genuinely believed human thoughts created physical, measurable, energetic outputs.
Right, the thought camera concept.
He believed imagination had a physical weight and frequency. And we know from the text that his most sensitive final papers were seized by the FBI, and some vanished into the archives forever. Historically, everyone has assumed those missing files were about the teleforce, the death ray, the weapon. But what if they weren't?
Oh, that is a fascinating avenue to explore.
If his theories about the physical, energetic nature of thought were correct, and his lifelong trajectory was moving increasingly inward toward the mechanics of consciousness, what if the missing papers didn't contain blueprints for weapons or flying machines at all?
What if they were about the mind?
What if those lost files contain his mathematical blueprints for mapping the physical energy of human imagination itself? What if the government didn't confiscate a bomb, but rather the world's first true map of the human mind?
The ultimate untethered energy.
The ultimate untethered energy. We will leave that question hanging in the ambient air.